So hot off the heels of the Meze Elite review, we're going to be doing a review of the LCD-5. Now I've actually had this for quite a long period of time and I have a lot of thoughts about it. Tomorrow I will be releasing a comparison video between the LCD-5, the Meze Elite, and the Diana TC from Abyss. I'm very excited about that video. I'm also doing a video at the end of this week that is going to be basically a Q&A about ultra high-end headphones. If you have any questions, leave that in the description down below. Quick disclosure here, Audeze sent this out for a review. They're not paying, asking, or otherwise influencing me to say anything good or bad. All thoughts and opinions, like always, are going to be my own here. This headphone is very intriguing to me because it's a very different Audeze product than I think myself and a lot of Audeze customers are used to. It's got a very unique style of sound signature that I don't really think any other Audeze product has currently, and I think that's either going to be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you're looking at it. Before we talk about that sound signature though, I do want to talk about the build quality. Now the build of this is some good and some bad. The good thing is that it's fairly lightweight. This thing is only 420 grams, which as a Audeze flagship is very light. It's also got a good use of materials and it looks quite nice in the hand. It's got carbon fiber, of course, on the headband. It's got this woven design on the grill and the backing, and then it has these sort of mirror finish drivers that look really, really cool, really neat in person. This is a very appealing headphone, and it's actually quite a bit lower in profile than a lot of previous Audeze headphones as well. So the head look is a lot smaller than it used to be. I don't know if this really matters a whole lot to most people, but it is something that is notable. There are a couple knocks against it though that I would really like to see improved in the future. One, this headband is a little stiff. There's a lot of clamping pressure on this. Now because this headband is carbon fiber, it's not really going to lose its elasticity anytime soon. So I'm not confident that this will wear down and be less of a clampy headphone than it is right now. Now the pads are a little bit different than a lot of Audeze pads. I think this plays a lot into the tuning and the feel of this headphone, but they swoop kind of inwards as you go closer towards the inside of the ear cup and outwards towards the exterior outer circumference of this ear pad. They're fairly comfortable as pads themselves, but I think it's just a clamp pressure that kind of makes them a little bit uncomfortable for me. The biggest problem with this headphone though, in terms of build, is that the pads are glued on, and I just wish this wasn't a thing, man. This should not be a thing. It really makes this feel like a much more last gen design than a lot of the current headphones, like the Abyss headphones, the Empyreans, even things like the Utopia. Using clips or magnets would at least let an owner who paid a lot for this headphone change them out themselves if you so chose. And another thing that this is behind in that I called out in my Empyrean review is that comes with 2 pairs of pads when you buy this. So yeah, this is not an area that I'm particularly happy with what Audeze chose to do. Okay, let's talk about amplification. I was using the 11 Audio Broadway. Now the reason I was using this is because it's got a little bit more bass response in the low end. It's a little bit more solid than a typical amplifier is. And it's also got a little bit more sparkle in the top end than some other amps do, especially when you go for like topping neutrality, which is generally what I lean towards. This is a little bit more dynamic in those ranges. And I felt like that really benefited the sound signature of this particular headphone. Now, in terms of how hard it is to drive, it's actually very easy to drive, but it is amplifier picky and it's very revealing. So your different amps are gonna have very different sound signatures, even though generally speaking, you don't need a really powerful one to run this. You just need something that sounds really good. So even though it sounds amazing on this Broadway, I'm not using 70% of what this Broadway is really capable of in terms of power output because this headphone is so efficient. It's not quite as efficient as the Elite is, but it's still a very efficient headphone. You will be able to get this and run this on just about any amplifier, even some onboard systems if you choose to. But I'd really recommend taking a look at something that's maybe Class A or something that has a very confident low end. I think you're gonna want that with this headphone. So I don't wanna get too deep in the comparative aspects in this particular video, but I do wanna talk about comparisons for detail retrieval, because this falls somewhere in the middle for details compared to the Elite and the Diana TC, TC being more detailed, Elite being less detailed. This is sort of right in the middle between those two. And it also manifests in a different way than both. This is a mid-range forward headphone, actually. This is a little bit more different than a lot of previous Audezes. It doesn't have quite as warm of a swing. In fact, this leans very, very, very neutral, and it doesn't really have a particularly cold or warm tonal shift to it. It's kind of dead center right down the middle. I think a lot of people who are more technical in their listening might appreciate this, but people coming from previous Audeze headphones may find this to be a little strange compared to what they are used to or maybe expecting with this thing. Now, in terms of technicality for treble response, this is a strange area for me because I felt like compensate with an amplifier that could really display the treble response in a way that I really felt like was good. I felt like this headphone was actually a little darker in the treble than it should have been, given how present the mid-range could be. I felt like if this headphone had a little bit stronger treble response and a little bit stronger bass response, both are achievable through the right amplification or something like EQ. But if it had that out of the box, I felt like this would be a very, very complete picture for sound. And I did feel like treble response was detailed, but actually a little bit underperforming what I would have liked to see. And it suffered from the same thing that the Elite suffered from, which was a little bit of a lack of a metallic shine or shimmer. It didn't really feel like it could really finish off a lot of acoustic notes, especially for strings like guitar or violin. It didn't feel like it could finish out the top end in a really satisfactory manner. Now, the area that I find best on this headphone is the mid-range, but it's so unique. It's very unique. It's got this strange, I'm trying to find the words to parse this out because it's unlike any other headphone that I've actually heard in terms of how it delivers mid-range, but it's almost got this nostalgic grunge to it. And I can't quite sort out what property of the mid-range it is that gives it this, because it's very body forward. It's got this very fulfilled forwardness to the bulk of the voice. It doesn't have any sibilance or anything like that. It's not a very sharp sounding headphone. It's almost like typical headphones seem to split the difference between lower mid-range and upper mid-range. They're either good at both. There are very few headphones, something like an HD 600 really rings a bell. Something like some of the ZMF headphones ring a bell for having a very complete mid-range response where you don't feel like anything is higher or lower than any of the other regions. This kind of hits me with that same feeling of completion throughout the mid-range. Now, for one reason or another, the mid-range also happens to be by far the most dynamic area of the sound signature. So you can have a relatively cool background and then you can just get pelted with this super loud vocalist. Depending on how the track is recorded, they can come across far more forward than you might be used to with some other headphones. Now, this is both a good thing and a bad thing. I think technically speaking, dynamic range in this area is phenomenal. However, when you're actually listening to it, sometimes it can take you off guard and be quite intense when you weren't expecting it. Now, I talked about in my first impressions of this that this really affects drums a lot. And this is the area that I think most hits with the power of a drum, with the real authority that a drum can offer. Now, I'm still going through memory lane with this thing, going back to all the kind of early 90s, early 2000s rock that I've been listening to. Things like System of a Down, Disturbed, a little bit of Avenged Sevenfold, things with incredible drum components to how the songs are made up. This headphone is just phenomenal for. Now, what this headphone is able to do that some other headphones can't, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing is going to be up to you, is it's able to almost, it reminds me very much of a concert performance. It's got this very performative strength through the mid-range, and that really controls the way that every song sounds. And it's got more of that live, grungy feel to it and less of a technical precision, less clinical scalpel that you might see with something like a Diana TC. It's a very, very different take on an ultra high-end headphone. This is definitely for some guys and not for others. I think Randy from Cheap Audio Man would love this thing, but I think somebody like DMS may not like this so much. Okay, bass response. Depends on the amp. Some amps it's really flat, not really dynamic at all. On an amp like this, it's a little bit more exciting and a little bit better. I still don't think it takes a crown for bass response from the previous flagship, the LCD-4, or even something like the 4Z, but it is not bad at all. It's very good. I do think it's a bit faster than the Elite's bass, but not as high in quantity. Now, sound staging and imaging are, it's a weird thing because the vocal size is so big that it almost seems like the imaging isn't quite as good as some other headphones, but I don't think that's true. I just think it's really displaying the vocalist to be really the forefront, or anything that's taking up that mid vocal range, whether it is a drum or it's a guitar. It's got this really full body to it. So that makes the imaging just seem big. It's got this very big presence to it. And it doesn't really have quite as much of a small vocal size as some other headphones. Now, honestly, I kind of like both performances for different artists and for different reasons. So I'm not going to label this as good or bad, but it is a feature of the sound. Okay, so my conclusion of this. This isn't a headphone that I think is tailored towards me, but I could definitely see being tailored towards a very specific audience. And it is very unique. This is a sound signature that I really have not felt like I've come across before. And it is quite different. I would sort of group this in the category of like, maybe try it before you buy it, because you may fall in love with it. And if that's you, then this is one of the only headphones that I think sounds like this, and that might make it actually worth the money to the right customer. But I also think it's very possible that it's not for you, and then obviously I would look towards something else. All right, that's going to be my full review of the LCD-5. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Audeze, for sending this out. Until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off. Peace. And impacts in a way that most headphones cannot deliver the same authority for their drum performance. Sexy. Should probably put that in.